Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's video where we will be casting the first copy of my second version of the Kronos maquette. If you want to learn how to make the mold, which we will need to make the cast, you can check out the mold making videos in the description below, or you can check out my catalog of videos here on YouTube. You'll find several casting videos there. A quick reminder before we begin, if you want to learn sculpture from me in person, there is a workshop at the Florence Academy of Art this summer from July 27th to August 7th, held by Mitch Shea, the director of the sculpture program here in Florence, and myself. I'll talk more about this workshop a little later on in the video. But there are links at the top of the video description if you're interested and want to sign up. We will cast Kronos 2.0 in this video from here on, known only as Kronos, and we will cast them in Hydro-Resin. Hydro-Resin and similar materials like aqua resin or jesmonite are easy-to-use, non-toxic composite fabricating resins, which work pretty much like plasters in a lot of ways with a little bit more flexibility added to it. It's not like a regular urethane casting resin that you mix into a liquid and pour into the mold. You can't pour this stuff. This material needs to be a certain thickness in order to achieve its advertised strength. The mix ratio is 2 parts powder to 1 part liquid, but you can adjust this ratio quite a bit without any negative effects, and you'll see me doing so during the video. The first mix here is quite thin, and frankly perhaps a bit too thin. For the second half of the mold, I actually adjust the thickness of the material by adding more powder to make it a little thicker. As I said, we can't pour this material into a closed mold and expect success. Not only because the material, but also because of the mold, which is not designed to have material poured into it easily. We have undercuts that would be tough to deal with if we were using traditional polyurethane or urethane casting resins, or epoxy resins for that matter. So we have to brush in the material while the mold lays open on the table. I've brushed the material into the mold with quite a bit of force, and I move around the table and I move the mold around as well in order to make sure there are no areas that are not covered by the Hydro-Resin. The material can be cleaned with water, so the second that I'm done here, I'm going to clean my brush in a big splash bucket of water. Otherwise the brush will become rock hard and I will need to use a new one, which is wasteful. I use gloves, as you can see, mainly because this material is very sticky, so once you get it on your hands, and especially your nails, it can be very hard to get off and it can take a while. And if I wear gloves, I can, if I need to, quickly take the gloves off, and then I have clean hands. If I need clean hands for whatever reason. Pick up the phone or clean the edge of the mold, whatever it might be. The mix should be thicker than liquid heavy cream, but not quite as thick as whipped cream. Somewhere right in the middle there, where the material can hold its own weight and will stay in place on vertical surfaces. During the first half of the mold, the material was a bit thin, which makes it hard to get a uniform thickness all over, as the material tends to pool in the lowest areas of the mold, running down the side and pooling at the bottom. The second half of the mold, the back half, was much more successful with a slightly thicker mix. What's important to note about this step is that if you create too much of a mess on the surface where the two mold halves will eventually meet, the silicone surface where the two halves will meet, you'll end up with a bad seam because the silicone can't properly meet, and you'll get a bad casting, and the sculpture will not look the same as if it was sculpted in clay. It will be distorted. So I brush in Hydro-Resin carefully and make sure that any spillage on the silicone edge where the two halves of the mold are going to meet is cleaned up before the material hardens up. Once the material sets, which usually takes between 35 to 45 minutes, it's much harder to clean, and we'll need to use much rougher tools and much rougher application, much rougher handling. And often enough, this rough handling leads to you not only cleaning the edge, but also cracking or breaking off pieces inside the mold, pieces that you need and wanted, which is bad for the final cast, of course. So, cleaning before the material sets is a lot easier and is useful. Because of the complexity of this sculpture, I needed to cut the mold into several pieces, and you can see how and why I did that in the mold making video on this project, linked in the description below. I have the little female character that Kronos is devouring as a separate piece, and one of its arms is a separate piece as well. Both of these must be cast, of course, and the procedure is exactly the same. The material is the same, except the molds are smaller. That's the only really difference here. A slightly smaller brush might have been useful, but I didn't have them. So while I'm doing the same thing that you've already seen me do and explain again, except in a smaller format, brushing Hydro-Resin carefully into these mold molds, that is, making sure not to get any material up onto the edges, let me remind you of the workshop that Mitch Shea, the director of the sculpture program at the Florence Academy of Art, and myself are holding on figurative sculpture at the Florence Academy of Art. The workshop will be held from July 27th to August 7th, Monday to Friday from 9 AM to 4 PM, or 9 to 16 if you prefer the 24-hour system. Mitch and I are from opposite sides of the pond, and between us we know how to work with both the 12-hour and the 24-hour system. So what is this workshop? It's a workshop on figurative sculpture, and we will be teaching you the techniques and processes and principles that we use to make our sculptures. Our method of sculpture comes from Robert Bodum, who taught us both at the Florence Academy of Art. He was the founder of the sculpture program here in Florence. This is an in-person workshop, so you must be able to make it to Florence, Italy if you want to attend, which I understand can be tough during these strange times. But if you have the opportunity to travel to Italy, this would be a good time to take the advantage of such an opportunity, as normally workshops at the Academy get filled up very quickly and it's hard to get a spot. What will you be doing at this workshop? We will be sculpting two sculptures, a half-life size full figure sculpture from life and a 3/4 life-size torso from life. Mitch and I will not only teach, but we will sculpt along with you and be giving demos as well, which is another component of this specific workshop, which is kind of rare at the Academy. We don't have a lot of time to do a lot of demos. This time, however, we do, and we hope that this will give you another avenue of insight into how we sculpt and the processes that we follow. And of course, on top of that, there will be individual feedback for each and every one, so that you'll know exactly what you need to work on. You will be taken well care of, and you will learn a lot. The spots are very limited, so be quick on the draw here. I'll leave a link at the top of the description below this video. You can also shoot me an email if you have any questions, and I'll leave my email address in the description below as well. I hope to see you here in Florence for the workshop. Okay, back to the casting at hand here. Once the material in the mold is set up, we can fill up the rest of the mold before we close it. And it's pretty easy. I fill it up to the brim with thicker material this time. Now I add a lot more powder to the mix and I end up with a whipped cream kind of thickness. Then I close the mold and I squeeze it shut. And by squeezing it shut, it fills in any gap in the seam and the excess Hydro-Resin gets pushed out at the opening. For these small pieces, a little packing tape will be more than enough to hold them shut. I don't need a lot of pressure. The most difficult part here with these small pieces is making sure that they line up properly. There's no registration in the silicone here, no physical registration, so I have to line them up visually, which is a major reason why I like to leave or have an open-edged mold, so that I can see the silicone edge once the mold is closed and be able to line it up from the outside. The large piece of Kronos himself has registration in the silicone, so it will close a lot easier. It's very tough to create proper registration on small pieces without making the silicone wall very large and thick. And because they are so small, it's easy enough to wrangle with them for a few seconds and line them up properly, and the material doesn't set up that fast, so it's not really a big deal. And especially considering I can see how they line up after the mold is closed, because the silicone edge is visible. Let's thank today's sponsors, my Patreon supporters on Patreon, who have ensured the continued existence of this channel and allowed me to upgrade my gear bit by bit, making better looking and better sounding content for all of you watching. Now, if you're interested in supporting the channel, or perhaps interested in getting personal feedback on your sculptures from me, then Patreon is the place for you. You'll get in-depth feedback on techniques and how you can apply them to your own work. Anything sculpture related goes. We can talk about armatures, supplies, mold making, anything you might need help with in your sculpting endeavors. So check it out. There's a link in the description below. And again, thank you so much to those of you who have given generously and supported me. It really means the world. Kronos gets the same treatment. Lots of whipped cream, thick Hydro-Resin to fill the mold to the brim before we close it. Now the resin must be fresh, so this stuff has to happen pretty quickly, and it needs to be fresh so that I can squeeze it shut, and the excess Hydro-Resin will squeeze out and fill the little gaps in the seam, and if there's too much, it'll get pushed out at the top or the bottom. The reason I went with filling the mold to the brim and making a solid cast is because of the size of the piece. A solid casting is plenty strong compared to a hollow casting reinforced with fiberglass, but the reason to do a hollow cast is that it's much lighter, of course. But with a small maquette like this, weight is not really an issue. It's not going to weigh that much anyway, and if you try to use fiberglass inside a piece this small, it's likely that the piece would become close to being filled with resin anyways. So, for such a small piece, a solid casting is quicker to make, and there is little ground to be gained weight-wise or strength-wise by doing a hollow cast reinforced with fiberglass. Perhaps we end up using a little bit more material, but at least we don't use any fiberglass. So, it's hard to say if we've actually spent more money or saved a little bit of money on material. Either way, the only thing that really matters is that the end result is good. And you'll see the end result in a future video. And you can see how the registration helps align the two halves almost instantly, not a lot of fussing about. Then we'll close the mold with bungee cords and hold it shut with bungee cords. And I try to make sure that I have even pressure and not too much clamping force, and the reason for that is to avoid that the soft silicone gets distorted by the pressure. But enough clamping force in order to make the mold close properly and leave no visual gap in the seam between the two pieces. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did and want to learn sculpture from me or just support the channel, check out my Patreon page. I give feedback and critiques on people's work, and we talk about whatever you need help with in your sculpting endeavors. And right now there's exclusive sculpting content on my Patreon. The first series we have embarked on is the Beginner's Guide to Figure Sculpture, And I'm super excited to finally be creating exclusive content for Patreon, and I hope you will be too, and we'll take a look. The link to my Patreon page is in the description below. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for a new video next Thursday. Hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified whenever a new video comes out. If you enjoyed the video, click the like button and share with your friends and family. It really helps me out a lot. Thank you for watching, stay creative, and I hope to see you in the next one.